Welcome, welcome, welcome to Immerse Students in Learning, Exploring AR/VR. We have the wonderful Rochelle. She is a friend of Educator Alexander Webinars. She has an open round door invitation. She can come in anytime she wants to and talk about anything she wants to, and we will be entertained. So who am I, you may ask? I am Dr. Desiree Alexander. I am the founder, CEO of Educator Alexander Consulting, and I am happy to be your host today. So these are all of the different ways that you can contact me. If you're watching us on the YouTube video, no, you do not get a certificate, but you do get the knowledge. And right underneath this video in the details, you will see the link for the resources. So you do get everything and everybody else gets. Aren't we excited? All right, so what do we have coming up? What's next? Well, next Friday, Spaces, who did our summer series this summer. So every summer we have a summer series apparently. So I'm really loving that tradition that has started with Sarah Keeper. So we have the Back to School Bash next Friday, and I will be the closing keynote speaker. But a bunch of awesome stuff, and look at all the prizes they're giving out. Like, that's more important than anything else, right? Look at all the awesome prizes they're giving out. So definitely you can stream this on Facebook or Twitter. As far as I understand, there's no like registration or anything. You just like hop on and start streaming. So awesome. Hope to see you there. Then we have creating follow-ups with Formule. So if you ever want to make things automated, so somebody fills out a form and they automatically get an email and that kind of thing, I cannot wait to learn about Formule. I use Autocrat, but with Autocrat, you have to have an attachment, but with Formule, you don't. So I cannot wait to learn about this. Yay. And then we have Google Trainer. What? How? Why? What? Right? So it's talking about like what is all about the trainer program. Why would I want to become a trainer? All that good stuff. So this one was actually requested. So we're going to have that on September 3rd. Then we have Start the Year Off Right. Not just using Spaces. So you may say, well, that's right. I came to the summer series. I know how to use Spaces now, but do you know how to use it specifically with parents? So we're going to talk about how to start that year off right with parents with that amazing Melody. And then increasing your EdTech footprint and influence. So if you're ever like, well, I want people, I have so many good ideas. I want them to, get those good ideas. How do I kind of step up my game? We're going to be talking about that on September 17th. And it is free. It's from Morocco, the Everyone Academy. If you click on the link and you see that it's a charge, it's only a charge if you want a certificate, apparently, or something like that. Just read the screen. You'll be fine. All right. Then Google and You updates to use in the school year of 2022. So Joy is going to come and let us know about all the updates. And I swear she did this for us last year. And I was like, duh, I work for Google. Not for Google. I work with Google a whole bunch. I know all the updates. Nope, I learned all kinds of new stuff. So definitely come. I was like, thank you, Joy, and listen to Joy. And then we have children of single parents, our overlooked stakeholders. So Eric is going to come and let us know about how our children who are of single parent homes, what are they, how can we help them, right? How can we help all our students, really, but also our students from single parent homes. And then we have TCCA, which is an awesome conference in Houston, Texas. One of my absolute favorites. So check that out. Special Education and Beyond in October, which I feel like every single person that calls themselves an educator should be at. And then organizing your professional products. This is another one that people ask me to do. So we're going to talk about, well, I want to start creating projects and, all this stuff. Well, let's talk about how you can organize so you don't drive yourself crazy. And then we have 3 tools with English possibilities. What 3 tools? We don't know, but we do know they have English possibilities. And that is Rochelle. You may be like, that picture looks familiar. It's Rochelle again. So she is coming back to talk about that. And then she's back again. Now, I do have to say something about this one. It used to be on a different date. So if you saw AI in education and you were like, oh man, I really want to go, but I couldn't go. Well, it's a new date. So you may want to go ahead and see, can you come on November 19th? And if you were register for the old date. We did send that email to say, hey, we changed. And if you're like, oh no, then just keep that in mind. You can always get the video. And then we have TCEA. I know this is like next year. It's like, Desiree, we're in 2023 already. Yeah, you know how fast this goes. So TCEA is coming up. I think registration opens in September. So there you go. And then we always have our self-paced classes, Google Level 1 and Level 2. And I just updated my Google Level 1 and Level 2, where you get like a Google Classroom with resources. So I'm very excited about that. And then we, of course, we have our SLLA test prep and all kind of good stuff that you can do. Ooh, last but not least, tell me what you want to learn in 2023. So if you want to do a webinar, if you're like, Desiree, I've never presented before, I don't know, come present. It's awesome. Or if you're like, I'm a seasoned presenter and I want to talk about blah, blah, come present. Or if you're like, well, I don't want to do all that, but I just want to know about blah, blah, fill out that form and let us know. Woo, I'm so excited. ARVR, ARVR. Okay, so instead of chanting it, we're going to let Rochelle talk about it. So we're going to talk about immersing your students using ARVR.
All right, well, thank you. And thanks to everybody who's joining in now or later with recording. I did drop a link to a form and I have 5 responses so far. And so even if you are watching on the recording later on at some other time, feel free to do that survey as well, because it helps me to figure out like what people want to know, what their concerns are. I do ask for emails. I promise I won't spam you. It's just so if I want to follow up with any additional information specific to what you asked about, makes it a little bit easier for me to get you what you need. And so I am excited to see more responses come in. So if you didn't get to do it, there's no pressure, but I'm looking at it here on my iPad. And so I will adjust as needed so that you have the best experience today. But first, before diving in, I just want to know one thing about AR/VR. When I say, well, we'll just go with AR. When I say augmented reality, if you could type into the chat, what comes to mind first? So when you hear somebody says augmented reality, oh, that's like the number1 answer. This needs to be like the game show. A lot of people think about Pokemon, IKEA, yep, robots, Merge Cube. I love seeing these answers. My students tend to think about Snapchat and filters and those types of things, making something appear, looking a little bit different. And so AR often before like augmented reality, some people, elementary teachers, accelerated readers. I remember being in a conversation, somebody said, yeah, I'm really not a fan of, there it is, of AR. I was like, but why? You can do it was such a mismatched conversation. And both of us figured out like, wait, we're not talking about the same thing. Okay, VR. So when I say VR or virtual reality, what comes to mind? And it could be something like an app, it could be an experience, it could be a movie, it could be something that you've read, that you've learned about, anything like that. What do you think of? What pops into your mind when you hear VR or virtual reality? Minecraft, real world simulations, great. Gaming, yep, video games have been enhanced by VR since the 1950s. Ghostfaces we'll be talking about today, that's great. Gaming and goggles, Oculus, yep. Great to see those. A holodeck. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I love just seeing what sparks. And this is what I do with my students too. Whenever I start to teach about it, I often ask them the same thing I just asked you. Like, what do you think about? What comes to mind? Oh, surrealism. That's a great one. As a Spanish teacher, I just finished this year in Spanish 3, teaching my students all about Salvador Dali and looking at some of his art. So I hope that you can see my screen now. If anybody would just put a letter Y or an N into the chat so I know for sure, because stranger things have happened. Thank you. All right. So on the screen, I have 2 things on the top left, which I'll draw your attention to first. The first bit.ly, it's very easy for me to remember these, are the links for some resources. The first one, the ARVR at the end, everything lowercase, my last name Pose, that leads you to, which I've seen some of you already on. It's a Google document that is multiple pages, but I create that and I share that instead of sharing my slides because Rochelle has a lot of slides. And I know that if you're like me, we've been to conferences and you open it up and then when you go into Google Drive, you cannot find your own resources. You're like, oh my gosh, where did all these come from? So I put that document together and I won't cover all of those things that are in there in this session today because not totally enough time, but I want to make sure that you have access to everything, links to articles, examples, if there's promo codes that get you a free trial, screenshots, anything like that. And then links to my blog where I put a lot of information. I take guest blogs too, but I also share a lot of what we do in my classroom. Of course, when it comes to AR, VR, and then later this year, as Dr. Alexander said, I will be doing the AI session. The second link is the survey. So if you didn't get a chance to do that yet, don't worry, plenty of time. And I thank you for submitting your responses to that. So diving in, I'll just tell you really briefly about my experience, because I know that, and one of the questions I ask in the survey and in sessions is, what is your comfort level? What are your concerns when it comes to these emerging technologies? For me, for years, I would say I'm just a Spanish teacher. And I know a lot of us have said, I'm just an elementary teacher. I'm just a social studies, a math teacher. I can't do those things because we basically tell ourselves that we can't. I'm teaching Spanish, so I got to focus on that content. I can't bring these other things in, or I haven't been trained on it. And so I don't know where to begin. And that is normal. It's uncomfortable. I know that for sure because I've experienced that. I'm not an expert. When I started to do some of these things, I just dove in. I spent a little bit of time on my own trying to figure out, the basics of if I was using something like was mentioned, CoSpaces, and then putting it in the hands of the students and seeing where they took it. And we know, and if anybody is a member of ISTE or you're familiar with ISTE, they have standards. And one of the standards talks about, being like a facilitator of learning and collaborating and co-learning with students. And that is one of the best things about teaching about emerging technologies is learning from them and getting away from feeling uncomfortable, like, I don't really know how to do that. I'm not sure where to begin, and just diving in. So I am a Spanish teacher. I'm also a STEAM teacher. I teach 8th graders all about technology, primarily emerging technology, but basics like digital citizenship, because they have the devices. They don't necessarily know how to use them responsibly or to make the best use of them in some cases. And so I love being able to learn with them and from them, and compare to my own 8th grade experience where we didn't have any of the tech. So my whole motivation is continuing to learn and then to share what I've learned with other educators, with students, to make it easier to get started. So enough about me for that. I did mention ISTE, and for anybody, like I said, who is a member, whether ISTE or a state affiliate of ISTE, we're thinking about standards in our classrooms. And for me as a language teacher, I think about the national language standards because Pennsylvania doesn't have its own set of standards for language learners. However, I also think about the ISTE standards, and especially because I know that not all of my students will go on to major in Spanish or become Spanish teachers, even though I tell them we need some. But I think about how I can best prepare students for whatever comes down the road in the future. And if you're here today to learn about AR, VR, but we hear so many things about all these emerging technologies. The AI, the AR, the VR, the metaverse, the NFTs, the blockchain, cryptocurrency, you name it. Lots of things out there. And we have to kind of keep up with some of those things. We don't have to be the experts, but we have to be able to bring those into our classroom and see what the benefits are. And there are a lot of benefits to using augmented virtual reality. So I think about the ISTE standards, and of course, all of the standards could be applicable here, but I focus on these for students and these two for educators, which I won't read to you, but I think about, those hands-on opportunities, hands-on learning opportunities, and collaborating and co-learning with students, because in my experience, I've had students who will come to me and say, I'm not sure how to do this. And I'll say, well, and I'm thinking, I don't know how to do that either. But I say, well, you have to kind of push through that productive struggle and figure it out. And then I'm, peeking over their shoulder, wondering when are they going to figure it out? How are they going to figure it out? And, then I learn from them. And so there's a lot of fun in that as well. So let's dive into the AR, VR. And I will tell you that during today's session, I'll watch the time, I'll watch the survey. And thanks, it's so great to see people joining in from all over the place, even Portugal. That's awesome. And I know we have a good mix. We have elementary, middle school. The majority of the respondents so far are high school, but I will give you examples across all levels that can be used in different grade levels, content areas. And then if you have questions, if there's something you've used in your classroom, drop it into the chat, share your ideas, because we always learn from each other. All right. So the big question was, AR, VR, isn't it just a fad? It's going to go away. it's just wow. And then like, what's the learning potential in it? What's the value? Why would you use it? Well, it is fun to be able to look at things, to hold something in your hand. And somebody mentioned the merge cube. So imagine you're a math teacher, and I know we have a math teacher in the group. When I was in geometry in ninth grade, I didn't do so well. I got some D's and F's the first half of the year because I couldn't understand the different angles, the shapes, the difference between the different shapes. Had I had a merge cube where I could hold that object in my hand and I could manipulate it and look at it, or social studies, geography, those types of classes, learning about the solar system in science and remembering where the planets were in relation to the sun, like trying to visualize that or look in my book at an image versus holding the solar system in my hand and rotating it and seeing the distance and the size between the planets and the sun. That makes a big difference. So I use the merge cube as an example. Traveling around the world. Okay, so when you can't travel or it's dangerous, it's cost prohibitive, you don't have access to the right resources. For me as a language teacher, my students say, can't we just go to Spain or to Mexico or wherever? Well, yeah, it'd be nice if we could, but right now we can't. So let's use this app or this tool that we have available. And maybe we have a headset, or maybe we just use our phones or our devices and we feel like we're there. It's close. It's not exactly the same, but you can kind of feel like you're more immersed in that space and travel around the world. When schools were closed, families had some fun with augmented virtual reality. I know my students were creating some things at home and teaching their families about it too. And so like transferring that learning and sharing with others. And I think the biggest thing is we want to move our students from being consumers to being the creators and the innovators. And so the picture that's on the screen, if anybody knows who that person is, if you could identify her by chance, let me know in the chat. Well, let's see if anybody knows. And then I have a follow-up question to that. The follow-up question to one, do you know who the woman is in the chat? Very good friend of mine. Two, that image, is that augmented or is that virtual reality? So there's the question. Is it AR or is it VR? And if you know, and it's augmented. All right. So lots of ARs there. Right. Because you can see her, you can see the room, and we probably know that that creature does not exist today. However, imagine that you're teaching students about dinosaurs or something, and you're like, just imagine like what their teeth look like. They're looking at a picture versus you can have one placed right on their desk in front of them, and they can look at it in the face without actually being in danger, for example. So augmented reality is exactly what that is. So the definitions, I did ask you before, what do you think of when you think of the AR, the VR? So augmented, great examples, Pokemon after ISTE, I believe in Denver in 2016. That's when the Pokemon Go was like, after the conference, everybody was all about Pokemon. I had friends would be coming home from a conference and my one friend Z would say, wait, stop, I gotta stop, it's Pokestop. I'm like, what are you talking about? IKEA is another great example. There are so many different apps that are out there that enable you to kind of experience something or to get a view of what something might look like in a space. Like let's say you're redesigning your office and you don't really feel like driving out to the store and taking that time when you could just grab your phone, put the IKEA app, for example, and there's other ones like it, and be like, oh, well, that desk would look really nice right there against the wall. Or yeah, that chair would be great. And then you could kind of perceive how it would look in your space without that loss of time, for example. Like the merge cube, holding a volcano, the solar system, an object, a dinosaur, something in your hand. And it doesn't have to just be a stationary thing. It can actually be moving and with sounds involved. Virtual reality. So most often people will think about, headsets. Somebody mentioned the Oculus, which I have 4 Oculus Go headsets, which are in boxes and not any good, but I do have my Quest. And I'm curious, for those of you that have joined in, does anybody actually have the Quest? If you put a Y or an N in the chat, just curious if anybody has one. Okay, some have 2. Yep, no. I had gotten mine earlier in the spring and I held off a little bit, also still in a box. That's okay. It took me a little bit too. I haven't used much more than Beat Saber right now. And it's kind of like, it's a good workout. So there are benefits to it. There are a lot of different apps on there, but thinking about VR, And here's another question for you. Have you seen any movies or TV programs where VR has been used at all? Is there anything that you've seen where they've had VR? So when we think about VR, you're fully immersed. You could have, now this is a Merge headset, which is a nice foamy one. Some of you may be familiar with the Google Cardboard, not the best for cleaning and disinfecting those. This one is better because it's foamy, it's soft, it had a bigger space for the phones. The Quest, of course, you don't need to have your phone inside the headset because it's streamed, you have the app on your phone, and so you don't need it anymore. So that's why it's like fully mounted on your head. You're not tethered in with wires, but there are so many benefits in using the VR. 2001 Space Odyssey. Thank you. Yeah, I think about some of these different things that we see in movies where there's like a simulation of something, but even in the real world, for me, I have Gmail, and you can set alerts for news. And all you do is you type in keywords that you want to watch. So maybe you want to learn about how VR is being used in the world of work or in education. Every day you get articles that have been pulled. Thank you, artificial intelligence and all of the things that are magic with Google searches, pulling in this information to show you that in the military, in business, in the healthcare system, they're using virtual reality for training, for simulations, so many things, fake news. Yeah. So VR, if you imagine somebody is training, or even in high schools for lab experiments, when schools were closed, chemistry, how you do labs, you couldn't actually be in the school to do that. So there's something called Labster, and it's Labster that offers these VR, simulated lab experiments for schools. I know resources and having access to those, funding can be a challenge. I know that's one of the questions that often comes up is, well, I can't buy all of the things. What do I do? If you have enough where you can get a couple of items and then use things like stations and have students in groups kind of rotate and take turns exploring some of those tools, that definitely helps. That's something that I did earlier as well. But thinking about lab experiments with funding, resources that you need, or even the danger of some things, that is what a benefit is of VR, is being able to simulate, even in the government and people that work for the FBI and those types of trainings. If somebody has a bomb and they're trying to train, like with the wires and how they're going to defuse the bomb, they can use VR to kind of go through and interact with that without somebody. I'll type this one in. It is LABS. There we go. So they can simulate that. Now, mixed reality, it's the merging. And so if anybody had ever seen the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, you have kind of like, you see the real world, and then you have this other thing on top of it. And so let's say you're walking down the street, you might have glasses on, and as you're walking, you see the sidewalk and everything in your surroundings, but maybe because of the glasses that you're wearing, you see in front of you like the weather, the news, anything, a Tesla, almost like that screen that they have where it shows people and images around. There is talk about cars having, through the dashboard, that as you're driving, you'll be able to see anything ahead. It might tell you if there is somebody crossing, you might see signs, all these lines and images across the dashboard, which I wonder about, how safe is that? But the mixed reality, let's pretend that somebody works for airlines and there's a lot of equipment, or in the healthcare industry, lots of equipment. Instead of having to have big manuals or lots of equipment to come in and kind of figure out, an engine and the different parts of it, somebody using mixed reality can have, here's your plane, here's the engine, I have the glasses on, and I can see everything laid out in that. Yeah, BMWs, I know, that's like, I don't like when I see like a glare on the windshield. So that article came out, I think there's 5 months ago, I think, with my students. And I said, well, how do you feel about this? And they said, well, it's kind of cool, but it's also kind of scary. And we had the conversations about it. So anytime you have ideas or things that pop in, please put those into the chat because I love to learn from you. So these three, there are a lot of possibilities, and the XR is just the extended reality. So it's not just, what you're experiencing right now, it's beyond that. You don't need to have the headset. You don't need to have a lot of special equipment. Sometimes some of these things are available for free to try. And I'll certainly give you some ideas here today. But when thinking about, like, if your class is a STEAM course like mine, or even if it's any content area or grade level, you can still teach about these things. Start it with a conversation, the questions. What is it? What are some examples? I often ask my students, how could VR help somebody? What are the different ways? Well, somebody's afraid to fly. Younger children who are afraid to go to the dentist or the doctor's office, for example, they have been using VR to kind of simulate what that experience would be like. For people who are afraid to give speeches, there is an app that's called Virtual Speech. And my Spanish students used this a couple of years ago, where you could actually upload your speech into the system and it would have it scrolling, and you wear the headset. And as you have the headset on, you can see your script in front of you. And there's like people, not real people, but it looks like an audience of people there. And you give your speech. And as you're giving your speech, it's tracking your words, the rate of your speech. If you're using filler words like the ums and the ahs and kind of hesitating, also tracks eye contact. And when you're finished, it gives you the time that you spoke and gives you feedback about how many words you used that were filler, if you spoke too fast, if you didn't make enough eye contact. It's also pretty neat because it has some already loaded in speeches by famous historians. And so that for students could be, very beneficial to kind of like build confidence in speaking. So there are a lot of really interesting ways that they are using these technologies in the world. And that's why it's important that we as educators kind of dive in and see what happens with students. What are the benefits in our classrooms, and how can it amplify what they're doing or give them an experience that otherwise we can't. It's one thing to say, well, imagine what it would be like to, and then you fill in with based on whatever you're teaching, but to actually be able to give them a chance to hold something, to look at it closely, or to feel like they're immersed in some environment. It is fun. It does boost engagement, but there's other benefits too, like social emotional learning skills and developing empathy, for example. If you show them and they actually feel like they're in some place where you can tell that people are having a different type of a life experience because the schools, the homes, everything looks different, and they can make that comparison. So there is a lot of fun. I will tell you that when it comes to like the wow factor, and this is not something that I made up, but I heard somebody say it once because they were worried about I don't know if I can teach this or do this. I don't know if I can bring the wow. And somebody responded and said, well, you don't have to bring the wow. The wow is already there. It's the tool, it's the app, it's the headset, it's the Merge Cube, whatever it is. You just need your purpose. Why are you using this? What do you hope that it's going to do that's going to impact students? Is it just strictly for consuming content in a different way? Or is it going to kind of amplify and lead them, spark some curiosity, make them be a little bit more creative because they're going to design something, to innovate, or to experience something that otherwise they couldn't? And so I loved that because we don't have to bring the wow. The wow is there in these different tools. We just need the idea to get started with. So we're going to dive into some tools. And I know based on the survey that pretty much everybody, nobody said they'd never heard of Nearpod. But I put it in here because there's so many things you can do with it, but it is how I got started using VR in my classroom. And so if you haven't done anything and you're kind of worried, especially with school starting, I don't have a ton of time, I go with Nearpod because they have those VR field trips. And those VR field trips, you can check out. There's so many of them based on different content area, grade levels. There are even careers that you can kind of feel students are experiencing or you can experience. I had students who wanted me to assign them the college tours because they have all of these different universities that they created these VR trips. And so students in my Spanish 3 said, could you assign us the University of Mexico and Harvard and a couple other ones? And I said, sure. And I did that, but they're available for you to get started with. And I know, as with all tools, not everything is free. And so keeping that in mind, what is the cost of it? And is it just something that has one use and that's it? And that's not the case with Nearpod. Nearpod, and I know based on the survey, people have used it, and I know that most people in this group as of right now have not. So maybe if you're looking for a tool that has some virtual reality and also has some other things, Nearpod is a great option. Now, there are some free, and they have different levels, like an individual teacher license and then a district and a school. But in that document that I shared of resources, there is a code that you can redeem to kind of get more access. So if you're thinking, yeah, I want to start the year with some VR in my classroom, I would recommend Nearpod, especially if you haven't used it, because you can search based on the VR trips. And I'm going to minimize this and go over here 1 second and go to Nearpod. I had actually written a blog probably a year and a half ago about Nearpod and like the top 10 VR trips. I went through all of so many of their different lessons in VR trips to see what was available. And I picked, 10 of them. So I have a ton of different lessons available that I've used on tons of different topics, but I have one that I did for my students, and we'll see if it comes up here. Oh, well, I searched all lessons, but you can see based on just quick search, an active volcano. So how often could you take students on a field trip to go see an active volcano? A little bit dangerous. Social awareness for grades 3 through 5. I know we have a lot of elementary teachers, and so social emotional learning skills and helping them to develop that and taking them on a trip somewhere and then having a conversation. And you can, if you've never logged into Nearpod, break it down by subjects, grade levels, and just scroll through and see all of the different options. And I know that for math teachers, because we have some math teachers in here, algebra, if you're an algebra teacher, you have problem solving going bananas, and just scrolling down, and hopefully, and nobody's saying anything, but I'm guessing that you can see my screen. If not, please tell me. Oh, the redeem code. Yeah, let me go back to this one. It is the PN and my first name, Rochelle, and the capital P should work. And if it doesn't, let me know. I do have that in the document as well. And so whenever you do go into Nearpod, just like I am, fractions, an enormous birthday cake, and you can preview it, you can add to your lessons, but there's something to get started with. So let's pretend, and I keep going with math because there were a couple of math responses here, but scrolling down, congruent lines and angles, poetry. So there's some ELA in the group here, but there are a lot of options, and going through, you can find something to get started with. So let's say that I want to pick, physics. I could do physics and I could preview it. And then the other thing about it is when you go through, so it tells you like what to do before the lesson, how you're going to get started, and kind of scrolls through, and it has a VR trip. So you can even add more into that. The other thing about this is, let's say that you really like this lesson, but you have your own materials that you want to add to it. Maybe you have a video, which you can search from within Nearpod, or maybe you have your own video that you created for students. This could be something done in class. It could be done as a student-paced lesson, for example, for those of you, again, most of you know Nearpod. But it's an easier way to get started that doesn't take a ton of time because they have all of those images in there that are powered by 360 Cities. And then what are the students learning? So yeah, this is great to look at. I'm on the, I can't even think of what it is. I'm at the airport. I'm on the plane, the tarmac, I guess. And that's awesome. I feel like I'm actually here. Okay, then what did you learn from that? And share that learning, and giving students different ways to share that, whether they draw an image or there's a quiz or some type of matching. And there are a lot of options available within Nearpod. So that's one that I recommend, especially because the virtual reality, which I'll type that in again, and you can, based on subjects, if I just wanted math, there are a lot. And so if you think, I don't see, I gave the example of geometry with the merge cube, but I know in my high school, we have an amusement park about 20 minutes from our school, and they go on physics day. And the students have a lot of different activities that they have to do, looking at the roller coaster related to physics. But you can see there are a ton of lessons here available. Now, I didn't break it down by the different grade bands, but they're usually, grades 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12. Some of them are specific to like one grade level. And even you could teach about Fibonacci in grades K through 12. So Nearpod is one that I definitely recommend. If you haven't tried it and you're just not totally sure about how to get started with VR, like I did, I dove into Nearpod and I used that in my Spanish classes a couple of years ago. Okay, the next one, CoSpaces. And I know that in the chat, whenever I said, what do you think about AR, VR, that CoSpaces was one of the answers. And I know based on the survey that not a lot of people have used CoSpaces. So I started to use it about probably 6 years ago, maybe, and it has changed so much since then. And the best thing about it is that you don't have to start from scratch like Nearpod, because there are lots of examples. There are tutorials available on YouTube that you can look at. They have lesson plans you can download that give you, exactly what students need to do. There's standards, but students, the best thing is to just have them go to CoSpace's site, which I'll show you here shortly, and have them just look at the gallery just to get some ideas. Now, in my STEAM course, when I gave students activities to do with CoSpaces, they had a choice. I said, create some, vacation spot, or is there a book that you read that you could do a summary of instead of a book report? Do you want to make a game? It was through CoSpaces that I learned what parkour was, because I had never watched The Office, so I didn't know. And my students said, oh my gosh, this is amazing, they have parkour. And then they asked me, well, how do you do parkour? I was like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. And then they showed me. And then when I did see The Office finally in 2020, November of 2020, I was like, I totally get it. So CoSpaces, I do have a code that you can use. And the neat thing about it is you can create in a couple of different ways. You don't, again, have to create from scratch, because some people, when they create their projects, they make it so that you can remix them, which is basically the same if you take somebody's template on Google Slides, for example, and you can make a copy of it, or any type of tool that you have where you can use that template and kind of share it, and people can make it their own. So these examples that are on the screen came directly from CoSpaces. So imagining those of you that are science teachers and you want to do some type of, you do a biome or something, and students have animals, or if you are doing a museum or you're learning about art, you can create these different spaces, a 360 tour, telling stories. This was one that got me more started with some AR, VR in my Spanish class, and I'll share that with you shortly. Now, for languages, doesn't matter, social studies, if you're talking about a period of time in history, there are a lot of examples here where it has, horses and chariots and soldiers. And it's really neat that you can take whatever's created and then have students build upon that based on what they're learning. You can also use and create on the Merge Cube. So imagine, instead of having students do a book report, and it may not be in an English course, it could be in my class, it could be in any class where they're reading something and they're going to kind of share what they've learned, they could create an interactive book on the Merge Cube. You just basically attach it, and then as people kind of use and look at it through there, they see the different characters and things on each side as opposed to on the screen. In terms of language, you, of course, can put, the speech bubbles. You can have audio recording added onto it. So my students, even though, I'm just a Spanish teacher, they used this a couple of years ago towards the end of the year. And it was unbelievable how much better they remembered that content than they had in years prior on the same topic. Fourth grade, yes. I have a friend that teaches third grade, and her students actually learned about CoSpaces from another friend who taught high school. And the high school students created a couple of different CoSpaces projects, and they shared them with the younger students. It was like telling a story. So it was, I think, for their English course in high school. And then they created, like I tend to do with my Spanish students, like a children's book. But instead of using, paper or some type of book for a presentation, they used CoSpaces. And then the students in the fourth grade used CoSpaces to create, in third grade, to create something of their own. Now, in terms of, because you can code with this, there's like the drag and drop coding, there's, more in-depth coding that you can do with it, but it's comfortable for all students because they can do as little or as much as they want. And they see a lot of examples there. So you definitely can. You would just need to have, if they have the devices and you put the app on the iPads, or if they have access to the computers to actually create, they would learn so fast. They pass us up so quickly. So here's some ideas for your classroom. Oh, wow. I love that idea. So creating a miniature golf course to demonstrate physics concepts. That is fantastic. I'm going to have to share that with my physics teacher at my school. So these are just a few ideas of things that my students had done in my classroom, but telling a story, even at the beginning of the year, and I'm going to have you get ready to be creating here shortly, just going to give you the warning. Of course, I won't be able to make sure that you're actually doing this, but that's okay. there are some great ideas that you can use for the start of the school year. And so if you are thinking like, you know what, brand new school year, I want to try something different, I'm going to dive in, do Nearpod. And Nearpod is great too, because also in terms of like early learners, younger students, language, thinking about accessibility, has the immersive reader, which is fantastic because for me as a language teacher, my students can not use it as a translator, but kind of hear like a native Spanish speaker, or students who are just building their language skills. The functionalities of immersive reader is fantastic. And that's another one of the reasons I really like Nearpod. Now, CoSpaces, those are some different options. There is the code, which is the COS for CoSpaces, and then it's my name and my middle initial. But here's another reason why I really like CoSpaces. And that's because about 4 years ago, they added on the feature of being able to collaborate. So you can, as if you have a teacher account, you can put students into different groups. And those students can be students in the same class. They can be students in the same school. They can be students paired around the world. So we have done project-based learning and connected with students in Argentina and in Spain. And we haven't done this yet because we've been using other tools, but I could have my students in my classroom and the other teacher students in their classroom in Argentina working together. Let me type this in. There are two, there we go. There's the code. So if you want to multitask and you go to CoSpaces, I'll be going to that tab here shortly, but you can create your account, and the code is that COS and then Rochelle D. But the students, they can be anywhere. So if we are, fully virtual, hybrid, we're in person, you can collaborate in the same space. Now, thinking back to digital citizenship and ISTE standards, there's so many possibilities for meeting and addressing those standards by using these different tools, especially with CoSpaces, where you have students who are in the same group, and at any point in time, they can interfere with what somebody else is creating in the same project. But they also need opportunities to build those skills and learn to kind of mind, like, this is my space in CoSpaces, this is your space in CoSpaces. But my students in Spanish 2 came into the class one day. They were actually in the library, which is where I have my STEAM course, and they saw what the 8th graders were creating. And they said, why don't we get to do the cool AR, VR stuff? And I didn't have an answer. I just was like, I'd never really thought about it. Now, we did use Nearpod. Oh, thank you. We did just use we had used Nearpod. And I didn't think of anything beyond that, because in my mind, I was like, wow, with Nearpod, I have this video on verbs and I have these activities and they're conjugating or they're doing matching and they're just kind of experiencing it. But I didn't think about having them create anything. However, I did have a student who made his own Nearpod lesson for a project, not because I said you can use Nearpod. He just liked it so much, even though at first he didn't want to use technology, that he then made his own Nearpod lesson about a camping trip and shared it with class. Now with CoSpaces, at the end of that school year, when the students said this, they had just, released this collaborative part of what they offered. And I thought, okay, so we were learning about narrating the past tense. And if anybody has taken French or Spanish, I'm not sure if Italian functions the same way, but there are multiple past tenses. And it's kind of confusing for people who are, English speakers, that we don't have. If we say, I went to the store yesterday, I went to the store every day, it's still, I went. But in Spanish, 2 different verb tenses. So the students struggle with the vocab. They study with the narration, the past tenses. And so I thought, okay, great timing. It's the end of the school year. Student engagement is down. We have to review for finals. It was a big risk. I didn't exactly know how it would go. I put them into groups. I made up some really weird variables about what they had to create, including the audio. They were put into groups that were, random. So in my mind, I was thinking they're going to create something with the language. It's going to be more authentic and meaningful. They're going to learn about augmented virtual reality, but I didn't think about all of the other benefits that will come along with it, like the building digital citizenship, the social emotional learning skills in terms of, they're creating, and as they're creating, they're building their self-awareness, their social awareness, the relationship building as they're working with their classmates, the self-management, because they're like, oh my gosh, this is so stressful. How do I get this to stay in this space on CoSpaces? And then decision-making, like, should I take what my partner put onto the screen, like off of the screen, like responsible decision-making. So there were all these other benefits, and it really turned out really well, because the following school year after the summer break, when, the Spanish is dusty in our minds, they still remembered it, because as they were creating, They were actively looking for different objects to put into that matched their vocabulary. They were typing in Spanish. They were recording the audio. They were working with their classmates. And then when each group had finished their projects, I had the headsets and we had the devices with the projects on it so they could each experience the other groups. So that repetition, it wasn't that it was the same video or same activity over and over. It was all the same vocab, but in different projects that were created, and it was much more meaningful. So that really boosted engagement, of course, and also the retention of the content. And it definitely made learning fun. So oops, let me pause this here. I'm going to minimize and go to my CoSpaces because, and I know we had some people join in. So there was a survey that I had shared that you could do, but I know from those that answered, I think there were only 2 people that said they had used CoSpaces. So those of you that are in here now, if you have used CoSpaces, would you put a Y in the chat just to make sure? Because I'm going to take a little bit of time and show you a great beginning of the year activity that you can use. And I know some people had never heard of CoSpaces. And so this will be awesome because I know another thing is some of the questions is like how to get started, anything simple that you can take into the classroom, how to build confidence, knowing, free resources. And this actually, even if you don't have a license to use this, you can still have students take advantage of what is available here in the gallery just to look at it and experience it. So one thing that I start with is I click on gallery and I have my students in my class before we even start creating or I start teaching them about it. I have them look at the gallery and I say, you know what, today, tomorrow, however much time it is, I just want you to explore and see what people have created. Look at the objects, look at if they're animated, is there coding, anything like that. Find something that's interesting. A lot of the time students dive into some of the games like parkour, like the sky parkour here, but the gallery, if you notice, it has STEM and coding. So in our group, we have somebody who teaches STEM, got the social sciences, languages and literature, maker spaces and arts. So lots of different topics. And of course, they're not showing you all of them. The other part of this is whenever you see that plus, it means it can be remixed. And so let's say that you find one that you really like. I'm going to go to this Roman House VR and you like everything about it, the way that it's set up, but you give your students some other prompt, some other elements that you want them to add into it, like maybe to continue telling a story that's already been kind of told in that space, then you don't have to design it from scratch. Now, it's fun when you do, but to have that starting point. At the airport, Hansel and Gretel, English quiz. Like there are a lot of really unique ways that teachers and students are using this. I know some teachers have created quizzes for this, interactive adventures, but anytime, like I said, you see that plus, it's remixed. Now, this other one with the cube is that it's been created on the Merge cube. Other things, 3 dots, anytime you click them, that's another way to remix it besides the plus. So one place to start is going into the gallery, you or having your students and say, what do you find? Like what's interesting, what do you notice? And explore from that. And then some of them are really detailed. And I know that for me in my class, we spend about a third of the year on AR/VR. And so there are a lot of different tools we use. I will do a Nearpod lesson with them. I'll have them create with CoSpaces and I'll use and demo some of the apps and let them use them in the classroom. So it depends on how much time you have. Now, if you're a math teacher, social studies, science, any of those topics, think of a way that students can create based on the content that you teach. And so maybe it comes down to something that is like a challenge every year. For me, the narrating the past tense, that was a perfect fit. But maybe you want students to really get to understand shapes and the shapes in relation to one another in proportions and sizes. And so they create CoSpaces and there are all kinds of different shapes of different sizes. They can create that. Maybe you want them to learn how to code, but without, the intense type of coding, and they do the drag and drop because a lot of students, especially older ones, have used things like Scratch Junior, or resources on code.org, for example. So the starting point, I would say, let them look and you look at the different gallery, what is available. And I chose STEM and coding, but let's say that you are languages and literature and you're like, you know what, we're reading about whatever this topic is, and you find something that works for you and then you just adjust it a little bit, or you study it to see how they set that up. That's another benefit of the remix. So what we're going to do now, and this is entirely up to you again, because I'm not there with you, we're not in person, but if you look over on the left side, a couple of the icons, so you can set up classes if you have a teacher account. So I have different classes. Students join with a join code, as they do with many other of the tools that are out there. The three dots, of course, you can always, archive it, delete it, any of those things. I had some students that had projects, so I could always click on their names and check out what they made, what their progress is in real time, because I try not to kind of hover over them. And sometimes I see them smiling and laughing, and I realize, like, they're not actually creating right now CoSpaces. Like, it's fun, but I can tell that they're probably watching some type of video, and I can see on the screen, I'll say, oh, what are you doing? And they'll say, well, I'm putting this on the screen right now. I go, no, you're not, because I'm on your project. So that's another thing. These are different CoSpaces that I've used. And so this is actually kind of funny. I will share this with you here. I found this Roman Triumph one. And so here are all of the different, components of it. And I can move around with the arrows, which I now know. And if I hit play, you'll see, the horse is going, soldiers, people are cheering. You could change the colors that people are wearing, the movements, the animations of all of the characters. But what I've tended to do is I look at the code and I see, each of the different things. So centurion horse, on path, straight path, and the time. So what I do with my students sometimes is I will go through and I'll find one thing and I will change it and see if they notice what happened. So I am going to change that 5 to a 2 and see, and I'm going to change it to, let's see, well, I'll keep it that. I'll see if it does it. The horse should be going really fast, because before it was kind of slow. And then there should be one horse that comes through fast, although it's not actually happening right now, but trust me, it normally does. Or I'll change the order and I'll have somebody walking backwards. I'll change the clothing, the animations of what is happening. And you can see all the different actions that somebody created. So this takes a lot of time, but with students, maybe you don't have as much time, which is why taking something that's already been made that can be remixed and having them totally change it, or have all the horses go in the opposite direction. It's kind of fun to do, to see what the responses are. All right. Those of you that are here, we are going to create a beginning of the year activity. So what you want to do, if you're logged into CoSpaces, awesome. If you're not, totally okay. You can just follow along here, and I'll do this kind of quickly, and then I'll show you the one I did. So when you go into CoSpaces, or students go into CoSpaces, they can choose a scene. Now, the 3D environment is the one that you've been seeing so far, and you can start from scratch and have it be empty. You've got your parkour, diorama, a gallery, the about me, and a COVID action plan. You can also upload a 360 image. You can create on a Merge Cube, and they do have some of the different templates available. So if you decide beginning of the year, your students are reading a book, you want them to do a book report, CoSpaces, there you go. You just have to create your class and assign students to create the book report on the Merge Cube. They can also do it about me on the Merge Cube. And then Tour is something that's new, that's in beta, which I'm not going to do that one yet. So I'm going to go back to create CoSpace. And we are going to, because beginning of the year, we want to get to know our students, we're going to do an about me. So we're going to use the template, and it'll take a second here, and it's going to load. So if you're doing this wherever you are, it loads with the default, and the camera is showing you the direction that you're looking at. Now, as you are creating, or as students are creating a couple of things, over on the left, the best way to learn is to just start clicking everything that you see. That's how you figure out where things are. And that's typically what students do too. But you click and you see, oh, well, it pops out, very similar to what would happen in Google Slides. So the navigation is easy. And they're like, gee, I wonder what this is. Oh, I see all of these different things. And if you notice, it might be hard to see, but as I scroll down on the screen, it lights up a different object on each side. And that's showing you all of those different things that are part of that first scene. If I wanted to add a new scene to this or to anything else, when this slide is open up at the bottom, you just create a new scene and it'll prompt you again for what kind, but not going to do that. going to close this. Now at the bottom, you have library, upload, and environment. So if I click library, you see there's all these different choices. So CoSpaces has come a very long way from when I started because there weren't anywhere near as many options available. But you have all of these different people. There's jobs, historical, and then other. And the Grinch, kind of fun to put into them. My students do use that one a lot. There's a witch, there's a vampire, lots of characters, a Santa Claus. The historical is fun too, because just like the one I showed you, some of the characters kind of, overlap in some of these, but let's see. Then there is animals. There are animals, a lot more. So if you're teaching about animals, you have students create a farm, transportation, building. And this is where I was thinking about like math. So you're teaching math and you have all these different shapes. So maybe you want students to build a structure. They're in geometry and you give them some different parameters of like, okay, it has to have this many objects, these shapes, this size. And I mean, we're creative, we make something up, and I'm making that up as I go right now. But you see, there's tons of possibilities. Now, the other thing is you can search. So if I search, it's not gonna be a surprise, anybody knows me, cat, there's a cat. I search house, a couple different houses, car, traffic light, anything associated with it, different items. So even if somebody is teaching, electives, like in my school, I know that some of the computer science teachers, the foods and culinary arts courses, like this can be used in any class because they have all of these different components in it. So back to this example here. So let's say beginning of the year, you want to teach your students about augmented virtual reality. You want to get to know your students. So we're going to have them do CoSpaces. And you say, I want to know all about you. Here's the template that you choose. So here's all about me. And now if I click on this, it opens up and it shows you what you're working on. So this is panel 3. If you want to code it, you can code it. The speech, you can have it thinking or saying, especially if it's like a character. Transforming, so the X, Y, and Z axes. And, this is probably way more than what you need right now. Just go through real quick here and we close that out. The materials, so maybe I don't want it to be yellow. I want it to be the font to be green. I want the font to be whatever color. I would change that. And then there's the text. So the students, when it opens up, everything is there. So then, of course, they would just change that and type in their name. And there we go. Oh, I messed that up. We're just going to pretend. Hang on one second. So if you're doing this, and I don't want to take too much time because I do have some other fun things to show you, it may or may not save because right now, let's see, I think it did. And I have mine created. The font's a little bit different, but you can change all of these different things. So if I don't want it to say trying out for the swim team, whatever students want, you can even change the favorites. You can add some different things to it. And let's say this is exactly how you want it, except you don't want the horse, or you don't want the horse to just be standing there. Different characters, different objects, in some cases can be animated. The material, the look of them can change. And you can, let's say that you are saying like, I love horseback riding, and you pick a character that looks like as close to you as you can, and you want to be like riding the horse, then you attach the objects to each other. So if I add in another object, like let's say, let me think here. Actually, I'm going to pick a flower, and I'm going to put the flower right here. So right now, the flower is kind of behind the horse. Now, if I use these arrows, that's how you make the object bigger, smaller, taller. The circle at the bottom is how you rotate it. The other piece of it is whenever you want to attach objects and things. So like, let's say that with the horse, oh, I just saw a comment here. Give me 1 second. Students have when they go to join as the teacher, you would create a class. Actually, let me go back here 1 second. I can show you that really quick. So I have some classes created, and if I am a student and I click join class, I will put in the class code the teacher gave me. Now, if I have this webinar, the class code is over here. So you would give students that code, and then whenever they created their account, it would ask them if they had a class code to join, and they would join that. And then for you, as a teacher, if you wanted to create an assignment, you could pick whatever type of scene. So if it's the about me, the 3D environment, allow them to use templates, you put your information there. And then when they logged in, they will be able to see that. And they're pretty intuitive. Okay, so here's the horse. And now I want the horse to be eating, or maybe I want him to be trotting. And maybe I want the horse to not be the brown horse. I've always wanted a purple horse, and I want the mane to be yellow instead. Very different horse. And if I want the horse to be attached to something else, these little blue dots, which may be a little bit difficult to see, appear. So wherever you would click that dot, it would attach the horse. So if I want the horse to be attached up there, the horse is now on the top, and I would have to rotate the horse around. So then, now this is just in your edit mode. If I then hit play, and I have to zoom out, so you can see the horse is actually doing the trot, the girl is moving, there's my flower there, and that's how it looks. Now, students can kind of rotate around, but they could easily fill this in. And I'll show you that the one that I created ahead of time, that was done just for time saving purposes. It's kind of like watching a cooking show where they're like, oh, we're going to create all this, and then, okay, it's all of a sudden done. So here is what mine ended up looking like. So I used the exact same template. I changed some of the colors. I changed my answers. I put my picture in instead of it just being a blank space. And great question, Eric. Thank you. So I clicked upload, and it gives you the option to upload from your computer, and then it puts it in here. And then what I did is I just slid it over to like in front of that space, but I'll show you how to do that. So now it's here. Now, if I hit play, that one is actually attached to that panel, but if I go the right way, but this one is kind of just hanging out here. Next to my animals, where I added the raccoon and a couple cats doing some rolling around because I do like cats. But I noticed that it's blocking the word learning. So if I click on it and I hit attach, again, on those blue dots, I could attach it anywhere. So if I decide I want it to be right at the top, I'll click that. And then the problem is that it is not the right way. So I would have to kind of rotate the picture to get it to the right way that I wanted, it to. And I'm messing it up now. But at any rate, you just kind of roll it around. Maybe I do want it to be like that, but you have the different X, Y, and Z axes. There we go. I'm trying to do this fast, and there. So now if I hit play, so it's kind of attached to the top of that instead of blocking where it was before. But when it was easier to do on this because I had the background. So for students, or for you as a teacher, maybe you want to introduce yourself to your students using CoSpaces, and that's your entry point into teaching them about augmented reality. Now, the neat thing about this is that you can, when you create some of these things, bring these objects into like the real world. So if I create on a merge cube, I can kind of stamp it so that it's like on the floor in my classroom, and I'm using the app and I'm looking and I can see this amazing space or this jungle scene or the chariots and everything moving around on the floor of my classroom. And I realize that it's augmented reality because I see the classroom around it. But for students, beginning of the year, we want to start with like building relationships and any time throughout the year as well. But this is a fun way to learn about each other and what their interests are, and also to teach them about, an emerging technology, to have some fun as well. And it's easy to get started when there is a template like that. So for anybody who's thinking like, I don't know where to start, Nearpod is great for a lesson. And if you just want to kind of have students experience something, go on a college tour or a career trip or something like that, or interact in a space. Like for me as a Spanish teacher, when my students think about their houses, and sometimes, especially during March 2020 on through May of 2020, when we were talking to students in Spain, who my students were complaining, and maybe yours were as well, like, oh, we're stuck at home, we can't do anything, we can't see our friends. But they were able to leave their houses and go outside and walk around in the neighborhood, do different things. But then they were able to talk to students who they weren't able to do that. They had to stay inside their houses. And so having these options where, like with VR, with Nearpod, where I can pick 3 different schools in 3 different Spanish speaking places and show that to students. And they hold their phone or their iPad and they're like, wow, like, you know, look at the way the building is, or look at the structure, or look at the clothing, or look at the houses, and compare them, and then think back to their own and make those comparisons between what their experience is like compared to somebody else's. And then they're developing that social awareness. So it is fun. These tools are great for a lot of reasons, and creating and putting whatever you want into it. But there's also that other component of it, like learning the content, of course, but also building those, you know, social emotional learning skills, because that's exactly what students need now and in the future. But having something to start with. So for beginning of the year, if you haven't started yet, maybe this is your weekend project. Maybe you'll get it done now. And this time you're like, all right, create something here in the augmented virtual reality. Because if you have the app and you put your app in the, and put your phone in a headset and look at it and experience it, it's a great way to get to know students and to teach about, you know, AR, VR. Now the code, I don't have anything, this hasn't been coded, but there's 3 different languages that are available for coding in this. So if you have the younger students that are just getting started, then Coblox is great because it's the drag and drop and they may be familiar with it. Python is in beta. You have the other options that are available. But the thing is, you know, for some students who are a little bit hesitant, like they don't have to do all of the things with the coding and with all of that. But the one other thing that I'll mention to you as you dive in, and you would probably figure this out, or students would, when it comes to the coding, you have to enable the different objects to be used for coding. And so your friend for all of these things is always like right click and all the options show up. And so animation, you know, if I wanted to eat, play, run, I just have the raccoon play right now. But code, as of right now, the raccoon would not show up if I wanted to do coding. So if I do using Coblox and I show name, so now when I go back to code and let me delete that, go back to Coblox, now the raccoon, it's not letting me, hang on. For some reason, it is not showing up it's not letting me click. At any rate, once you enable it in Coblox, it will then show up and you can manipulate it. So CoSpaces, there's a lot of potential for it in different grade levels. Even if you have, you mentioned the younger students in grade 4, if you don't have the resources or not sure about them getting started, like just having them explore in the gallery and see what's available would be a good start. And then open it up on a couple of devices, or have a Nearpod lesson for a small group of students, and then have CoSpaces on a couple things for students to just kind of experience and have a conversation about. But being able to create, you know, it does take some time. I have a student who really was not a fan, of technology and all the AR, VR. And I remember that this is probably 5 years ago, because the student, actually 4 years ago now, because the student is a senior, and it was, you know, 8th grade course. And the whole year, everything that we did just did not let me know they didn't like it, which I appreciate the feedback. And finally we got to CoSpaces. And now as a teacher, I can see what they're creating, but I didn't, you know, go in every single day and look at all of their different projects. But I remember on a Monday early morning, I had a phone message from the parent of this student that said, I don't know what you've been doing in that class all year, but name of the student, spent the entire weekend working on CoSpaces and wouldn't stop. I was like, wait, what? And now the parent knew that the student was always saying like, I don't like this, because they didn't want to really do anything throughout the whole year. And then for whatever reason, loved CoSpaces, made some very scary parkour with clowns, and was very frustrated when I was like, I don't know how to move in this, which again, we don't have to be the expert. And ended up making like 15 or 16 different projects in CoSpaces over the course of like the weekend class and then over the weekend. I've never seen anything like that. Like, I kid you not, it took like the 6-7 months of the school year to get to this point where finally something, and it was just about having all of these different options to be able to find and do as little or as much as they wanted to code using Coblox, or to do a more, you know, intense coding, but make it their own and have fun. So it's all about the choices. And again, you know, having students kind of consume because they look at a Nearpod lesson, or they look at something that's in the CoSpaces gallery, but then taking what's there and either building on it because you remix something. So like you have a comfort level, like, oh, okay, something's already created. Now I can study this and I can make a couple of changes. I can change the animations. I can change the colors. I can change the characters if I want. And then once you kind of like build that support and kind of scaffold it in a little bit, then you say, okay, now that you've had like, you looked at the gallery, you've used this template that's already available. Now I want you to create something. And this time I want you to create on the Merge Cube and take it up a level. But the thing is, you can find something for students to use that meets their interests and their needs and their comfort level, as well as ours too. Because, for us, it's like, oh, I got to learn this other tool. So if you have other questions about CoSpaces, drop it in the chat, or, you can send me a message on Twitter, email, anything, anytime. I'm happy to answer. If I can, or share some extra resources with you. So going back into some more, because I know we still have some time left. And if you're still creating with CoSpaces, keep on going. I will keep sharing some other apps and tools that are out there. Now, this one is kind of fun. It has some different characters in it. And this is one that I made. And I'm curious if you type in the chat, is this an example of AR or VR? So you got the cat there playing with the ball. You can't hear the sound, but in the chat, I'm curious, is it AR or VR? Yes. So that was my old Mac, but it's a cat that is one of the different characters. And the green that you see is whenever you select the character, it kind of forms in the space. There is often some music or something in the background. But just imagine those of you that are elementary teachers or even high school, it doesn't matter, because it's still like, I get excited when I see these things. Maybe you want to welcome your students back to school with a short video, and it has your voice, but it has some character that's in your classroom. Like, wow, look what's happening in our classroom. Bet you can't wait to get in here and learn today. But you have, I think there's like 15 different characters. One of them is this big elephant that there's a pool and there's music in the background. It gets this water, like sprays water. Of course, it's not real water, but in my classroom, what I often do when I'm teaching about this and then let students kind of explore is I have my iPad and I mirror it onto we have Prometheans now, mirror it onto the board and, kind of put these characters in the room and show them a walk around and show the differences of, is this AR or is this VR? And then I give them the chance to come up and create something. But it is a lot of fun to see what's out there. And I remember when I got my new iPad about 4 years ago, I kept adding all of these different apps on, similar to this one, that you were able to create something really quickly. So possibilities for anything. I'm sure, again, as teachers, we're very creative. We can think really quickly about like, gee, how could I use this? So find some character, or if you don't have a lot of resources and maybe you do have the iPads in your classroom, maybe a couple iPads, or if you have Chromebooks or computers, because CoSpaces works on Chromebooks, you have stations and you're setting aside time as students are learning about AR, VR, and you have different groups. One group is with Nearpod, the CoSpaces, and then you have something that students are going to create using this app, or it's something that you created. Maybe they read a book and it's about one of the characters you find in this app, and then they talk about it and record their voice. Lots of possibilities for that. And it's not anything that takes a big amount of time at all. Google AR VR, if anybody has used this, I'm just curious, like if anybody remembers, you're going on a vacation and you pull out, you're in the car and you got the big map. Anybody ever use those maps? You're like, which one of these roads do we go on? You're lost and like, where's the exit? Anything, you're like, then it's like covering up the whole dashboard. Then anyway, totally different now. We have the GPS in the cars. You even have Waze, of course. It narrates in a different accent if you wanted to, even celebrities. You're walking. I know, and I'm curious, anybody that's in here, if you went to ISTE in June this year in New Orleans, because I remember, like, I'm really good with cities, but I was trying to get to one event and I'm following the directions, and I was so far off from where I was supposed to be that it was very, very frustrating. I got a lot of exercise in, but you can walk and you're seeing everything live in Google Maps. And it's like, wow, that is neat. Now with the Google AR search, if you've done this where it shows up, like you search something like, I don't know, I'll use the example of tennis shoes, because I had a student not even in my STEAM course, in my Spanish class, that said, hey, Ms. Poe, do you want to see these shoes I'm getting? I'm like, I don't think so. Why? Well, they said, did you see this? Like, I just put these shoes, they're like on the floor here. I'm like, well, I hate to break it to you, but they're not actually here. But you can actually put those 3D objects into your space just by searching within Chrome. So Google AR, VR, that's a neat thing to use. Not anything that costs. But the other part is that with Google, and actually I'll minimize this too. If I type in Google AR, VR experiments, there we go. They have, there's AI in this as well, but they have these different collections. Oops. Oh, that's okay. So if you want to know about, AI, all these different web XR, AR experiments, web VR, and web VR, for anybody that doesn't know, it's just web-based virtual reality. So you don't need anything special. It's fully functional on your computer. You don't need the headset. This one I did a couple of years ago, and it was virtual ping pong. So I could play by myself, or I could play against one of you by sharing the code, which is pretty neat. They have web VR music. So another way that you don't need a specific app or tool or something that costs, that you can, and of course ahead of time, depending on the age of your students, you want to look at the things that are available to make sure that everything is appropriate. But with some students, giving them some different options to kind of explore on their own. So if I go back to the AR experiments, for AR and drawing, just a line is a lot of fun for anybody that likes to like doodle and do things. There are some apps that are available that do have a cost, but you can use some of these different free things available through Google and see, pyramids and lines, and there are a ton of options. So draw and dance, so your very own dancing stick figure. Some of these are newer that I hadn't seen either. So again, like, it's nice that you have some of these things like CoSpaces and some of these other ones I've mentioned so far, but whenever you have these things that are free, so if you don't have a ton of funding or a lot of access to the devices to use some of these things, breaking it into the stations and giving students a chance to kind of explore, and in some cases create on their own. So I didn't want to forget to show that. All right, moving on. So Merge, I know that probably almost everybody has heard of Merge, or if you hadn't before today, I've been holding this up a lot, but it is a cube that has like holograms on it. So I always imagine, I think of like Star Wars and Princess Leia appears, okay? So it's this image, but there are different codes on the side. And so a couple of years ago, probably maybe 4 years ago now, and I wonder in the chat if anybody wants to type in, did anybody buy a bunch of Merge cubes for $1? Or do you remember that? Did anybody go like, where are the Merge cubes for $1? Because they were around $15, I think. And then there was a period of time that Merge, Walmart, exactly. There was even a website that you could click on to find like the zip code, and then it would tell you where to go to. And where I am, there weren't any nearby, but my dad was in Charlotte. He's like, hey, I just found this Walmart in Charlotte and they have like 27 Merge cubes. Do you want them? I was like, yeah, for $27. Now I think they're around $20 or $22. But there was a period of time where Merge was not going to continue with, keeping the apps going. And so it was going to be very limited. But then they revamped, and I think it was the year that ISTE was in, it was either ISTE or TCEA in San Antonio. And I went to Merge headquarters, and they had, now this is a Merge headset, which, it's foam, it's very nice. You can put it onto your head, so it's, hands-free, which is great. But seeing like what they started with, and anybody who has ever done yoga, like the blocks, they had like the iterations of the different headsets and how they started to make them with the Velcro and with the box scares you. Oh yeah, it does. The headset, they had like these blocks that you would use for yoga, and they were strapped together. And Stephanie, who is the wife, and she is with Merge, she was showing me like all the different ways that she was trying to create these headsets. So the nice thing about this is that, well, there it is, the head. So imagine being able to hold, a volcano in your hand or the solar system. But years ago, before they went on sale for $1, I had one. And then somebody had shared, and this is actually in my document, the PDF that you could actually print the Merge cube. So I went to school on a Monday morning and I was like, I'm going to print a Merge cube. And so you can see in the image on the left, there's the real one. And then there's this bigger one. They weren't happy in the library because it used a ton of ink, but it took me only 35 minutes to put that cube together using manila folders. And I carefully taped the edges. And I was like, all right. And I got my phone with the app and I used it on my please work and it worked. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. So I had this idea. I don't have a ton of merge cubes. So I'm going to print a couple more copies to make the merge cubes. I'll take them to my class later, my 8th graders. And some of the students, I'll have them use the cube I had with the one I made. And then I'll see if I can get a couple of students to put them together. So I said, who wants to make the merge cube? And hands went up. So I set the materials down. I said, okay, I'll be right back to help you get started. I walked into the separate room, which was kind of like the STEAM makerspace room. And I set down the merge cube and I got the iPads and I put the apps on it. And 5 minutes went by and somebody came behind me and they said, okay, what do we do next? And I said, oh, I'll be right back to help you get started. They said, oh no, we finished them. I said, what? 5 minutes. So I walked back out and they had made the 3 merge cubes in the 5 minutes that I was gone from dropping all materials on the table. And I said, wow, that only took you 5 minutes to put those together. And the young girl said, who actually just graduated this year, they said, well, how long did it take you? I said, not 5 minutes, it took me 35 minutes. But the neat thing is that, when you didn't have a lot of the resources, being able to print it, even though it used a lot of ink, I could have one student hold it, or I could set that one big merge cube or the small one on a table. And if I had the iPads, a couple different students could use the iPad and use one of the sides. So even if I had 20 students, and let's say I only had 5 cubes, or if I had 6 cubes, I could break them into groups and they could still experience it. Now in, virtual learning, it was a little more difficult because didn't have them, but there was a smaller one that you could print about this size that, again, you would have to use one sheet of paper instead of like all of those pieces that I used. But the students at home, if they had the printer, they could print them. But I did actually print copies at school and I sent them home with the materials, but they could cut it out and make their own cube and use some of the activities online. Now, the other benefit of Merge, one, with CoSpaces, of course, you can create on the CoSpace or with Merge with CoSpaces, and so you can hold that. The other piece, like Nearpod, Merge also has the immersive reader, which is what you see on the screen. So if you aren't familiar, for me as a language teacher, using the Merge cube in my classroom, unless my students created with CoSpaces, where that it's in Spanish and it's like an interactive story, there's not, a real clear defined connection. However, with the immersive reader, I could have my students use some of these lessons in the Merge EDU and learn about bugs, for example, in this case, but have them use the immersive reader so it translates it into Spanish. And as they're, learning about the bugs in the Spanish class, they're hearing the Spanish, they're seeing the words. I could even have it highlight the verbs because, identifying the different parts of speech, that sometimes is a challenge too when you're learning any language. So there are definitely options with that, but they have a lot of different lessons available. Now there is, again, there are, lessons that are there. There is a code and a QR code that you can scan where you can sign up to get kind of like a trial with it. I have an app on my phone that it has a lot of different games on it. There was a Mr. Body. There was the solar system that you could look at. But even for things like, dissecting frogs, instead of having all of those resources and materials, in a virtual environment, a student being able to hold the cube and like look at the dissecting the frog. The other thing that's pretty neat about it, besides, oh, I'm holding the earth or a volcano in my hand and learning about it, you're attaching the meaning to it because you can see it. I mean, I can show videos, I can show pictures, we can talk about it, but that repetition and actually being able to see and connect with it is what makes it a big difference. And not that we need to have a ton of knowledge about it, but just enough. The other part of Merge, which is pretty neat, is this Merge object viewer. And this is what's kind of like, wait, what? So before I had to hold the cube, or you have the little stand that comes in the box sometimes, or you just prop it up and you have your phone, you kind of move it around. But with Merge Object Viewer, there is this little icon that enables you to basically stamp whatever the object is into the space around you. So let's say that you are teaching your students about art or different animals or parts of the body or anything. You can see in their library, they have all of these different characters and objects. They could make multiple objects and put it like in a museum or in some type of a library and not have to hold the cube to see all of that. Once you stamp it, you put the cube down and you're just holding your phone and you see whatever is there. So if you had, 3 different cats or you had different statues lined up, you can kind of look at those and just stamp them into the space around you and look at them. And so that's what's pretty neat is before you're kind of like limited because, one hand is here, one hand is holding the cube, or you had to stay near the cube, but now being able to stamp it and then kind of move around whatever that object is. So that is the code, and that code, the QR code to get your free trial is actually in that document that I shared. But it's another way to get students to understand like, what's the difference between augmented and virtual reality? Let me see questions here. Thank you for sharing that link. But lots of possibilities. And again, I always like to think about, the purpose of the tool, what's it going to help you and the students, of course, but help us as educators to provide better for them. Can they create with it? Yes. Because with Merge, they can look at the solar system and the volcano, but then if you have the object viewer, then they can actually create something. Maybe they read a book and they put the different characters or animals, whatever it is that they're learning about into that space, or they're using CoSpaces, but they're creating on the cube. And then whatever they create, they can kind of hold on in their hand and look at it. And then of course, share that with other classmates, and it becomes a learning tool. And that's what's pretty neat as well, is when students create something and it's for a purpose. So it's not like, well, I'm just creating this because it's a project, now it's over and done, but they see the value in it and they're like, oh, wait, you're going to use what I created for your other classes? Yeah, because you learned how to narrate in the past tense and we're going to do the same thing. So now I can share this with my students next year and the year after, and it helps them to learn. Some of the other questions that I get too is comes down to knowing everything. We don't have to know everything. I wish it were possible to know everything, but we also need to kind of push ourselves, because if we're only teaching what we know, what we're comfortable with, then we're limiting the growth of the students. And especially when it comes to this, things are changing all the time. It is so hard to keep up with all of the tools that are out there with any topic, let alone AR, VR, but you just have to know enough. So about Nearpod and what's available. Maybe we're trying with CoSpace, or if not, you saw some of the options and you see there's templates. The students, you could just get them started on it. I gave you kind of an overview, a little bit of how to create, a lot of right clicks and clicking on the 3 dots. There's lots of videos. There's tons of videos out there that are available, even short ones for CoSpaces, 20 seconds, 50 seconds of how to do specific, tasks within CoSpaces, that Devar app, the Merge app, of course. So you don't have to worry about some of those things. And I know even when it comes to access, sometimes we don't even have the devices in our classroom, may not have internet at home. That is a big issue. Hopefully one that has become more resolved, especially in the past 2.5 years when it became really well known, wow, we have families that don't have these things. That's first and foremost, is making sure that everybody has a chance to experience these. And then if not, what can we do to provide those opportunities? And so sometimes it does come down to us as teachers sharing it with students, and then finding ways to find some free resources, like the Google AI, AR, VR experiments, for example, even within your school community. I know my school district is part of a collaborative that is based through a Penn State branch campus, and they have a lending library, kind of a STEAM library. So if I want Makey or different robots or drones, I can borrow those and bring them into the classroom. And the other piece too is there's a ton of grants out there. And I know writing grants takes a ton of time, but I have some friends that have really gotten some awesome resources for their schools that they didn't have before, because they wrote some grants and were able to get some, even just a few iPads and some different codes to try things out. So they are out there, but of course it takes time to fill those things out. And then that's what it looks like when you print. So not as much ink as the one that I made. So students, and that link is in there, if they're at home, they can print it, they can tape it, glue it, whatever together, and then check it out. And again, holding it in their hand, which that is cheaper than the $22. I mean, it's nice to have these, but if you don't have these and you can print those or print them at school and give every student one and assemble them together, it's a lot of fun. Okay, here are some others that are pretty neat. This one is called Leo AR, and the screenshot that you see doesn't exactly do it justice, because those big cats and that elephant and that tiger and the butterfly that are in the background are actually moving whenever this is on my iPad. but it is very realistic. I mean, you know that they're not the real animals, but they look like it because they're, cleaning themselves or they're moving or they're flying. But your phone is kind of like a portal in some of these apps where it takes you through from like, yeah, I'm in my real world space. So, oh, I'm kind of in this virtual environment. But the neat thing about this one is kind of similar to that other, the Devar app, because as a teacher, you can use this to welcome students into your classroom, put some different characters, animals, whatever into it. There is a scary clown that's in this one and some different clowns. So you might want to stay away from that. But for students, if let's say you have 4 iPads and that's it. So one iPad, you have students work together, they're going to create something with Leo, and then you divide the other ones up. But it is a good way. I mean, you can think of so many different things to use this for retelling a story, for beginning of the year, to have students create like an about me, where what are the things that you like, that you're interested in, put those things into this space and then narrate a story. So lots of possibilities. The navigation on a lot of these creation tools, like these AR ones, like this one, are very similar, where the items that you can add are either like left and right, and the icons are pretty consistent, or there's like up across the bottom that you can see. So Leo is one that's fun to use. I think my favorite, one of my favorites, I had another favorite, but they stopped keeping it updated and it's now gone. And that one was awesome. It was called Figment. But I'm curious for anybody that's joining in, if you had ever heard of HP Reveal or Aurasma, either one of those, HP Reveal or Aurasma, because this one thing does what those did and more. Yes. Okay. The problem was that a lot of people had used, not a problem because they were using technology, but they used, I think it was HP Reveal or one of the two of them, they were using them almost for like a yearbook, and, using a trigger, a target image, and then having some type of video or something pop up with it. And then they disappeared, saying, we don't know, because technology disappears as well. But this one, and I have it playing in the background so that you can see. So in terms of like, what type of reality is it? Well, that's really where I was. I was at a conference in Florida a couple of years ago, and I had about 15 minutes where I was actually not in the conference. So what I do, I take my iPad outside and I add in all these different animated characters and people and things. There's a dancing Hillary Clinton. There's a bird, there's a running donut, but you see the real world behind. And on the left and on the right is all the different icons for things that you can use to manipulate the objects, to make them bigger, smaller, take a screenshot, to record a story. So again, whatever you're teaching, you can find a lot of different objects, people, things inside of this, and then record something. This one on the right, okay, you can identify the people. These animals, they were actually moving. I just took a screenshot. So we were painting in the room. So there's things on the ground. So that's the real room, real world. But then you have these other things on top of it. Now, the neat thing about this is you can create, a trigger or a target image. So if anybody has ever read or heard of the book Be Real by Tara Martin, who's a friend of mine, a couple of years ago, I read her book. And when I was done, same year, coincidentally, that I got that iPad, I thought, you know what, I'm going to make this thing creation based on like after reading the book. So that's what is playing up there on the top. And then there's the screenshot on the bottom. So I just put the book and I use that. So whenever you scanned that book, that the things that you see would appear. So I used that, I recorded it, I downloaded it, I uploaded it to YouTube, and then I tweeted it out. I did all these steps in the process, and I tagged Thing at the time. Well, then Tara was like, "Oh my gosh," and I laughed. I'm like, "Yeah, it didn't take that much time, the download, upload, like no big deal." Well, then Thing took what I had created and now added it to their library. So if any of you would actually get this app on your phone, either now or at some point later, and you would go, if you have the book, or if you would go onto Amazon or Google the book and you scan it with your app, you'll see what I created because it's in their library. So with students, if they're doing a book report, you've had a couple of options. They could use the VAR and put a cat or some object on it. They could use CoSpaces. They could use the Merge Cube. They could use Leo, or they could use Thing to have that book be when you scan it, then it opens up and there's characters, animations, them talking about it and sharing their learning. And so it is more authentic. And of course, it's connecting them, learning about something that's like an emerging technology like augmented virtual reality. But it's fun to create. And for us as educators, like keeping up with all the things, we don't have to use all of these different tools. I use them all because my course is, I have it divided into a lot of topics. The AR, VR, the coding, all the NFTs, metaverse, all AI, you name it. So we have a lot of time. But if you don't, just finding a couple that do a lot or that you can use throughout the year or rotating throughout the year. And maybe beginning of the year, it's an About Me with CoSpaces, or it's a lesson with Nearpod, or you're going to create something to welcome students in using one of these other apps. Another one, and my friend Jamie Donnelly, who was the person in the picture I had asked about earlier, I'm not an expert when it comes to AR VR. Jamie is an expert when it comes to AR VR. And I'm fortunate, one, to have her as a friend, two, to be able to learn from her, three, to be able to present with her as many times over the last couple of years, because what I love about Jamie is that she really knows this field so well, and she understands all of the tech and all of the, just everything about it. And I'm in the classroom, and so I get to kind of try these things with my students. If she says, hey, Rochelle, I found out about, check this one out, see what your students think. And then we can have those conversations. Then we get to present together. We have a ton of fun. But she has 2 books, which are actually over my shoulder. So if you're looking for a great book, and I may have her books listed in my document, but if not, she has 2. It's Learning Transported was her first one. And then her second one is The Immersive Classroom. And actually, I'm going to grab it because I'm going to show you the cover. So on this cover of the book, hopefully you can see it, there is, I think it's a whale, I forget offhand, but there is an app that, Jamie is awesome. There is an app that actually, this book, it's similar to what you saw with Thing. So if you have the app and there is interactive content in it and you scan it, I think it might be iJack, but I could be wrong. This actually comes out of the book. So if you scan it, that whale comes like up out of the book cover at you, which is pretty awesome. So she has in her book, and I'll show you this too, just because like if you're looking for a lot of resources, I know somebody had asked about the Oculus headsets. When we were at ISTE this summer, there were 2 AR VR playgrounds. There was one on Sunday, and then there was a fully immersive one where we had the Oculus headsets and the UVC cabinets to clean them and these different stations set up. And there were bulletin boards that had like printouts of all of these different apps using the Quest available. But in the back of her book, if you can see, she has all of these different apps and she has the code to scan. And she also tells you, is it for creation? So if we're looking at consumers to creators, what type of a device? Is it AR, VR? What's the grade level? What's the subject area? And so just scanning through, she has like subject area. A lot of them are all, which again, we're creative. A lot of them are K through 12, K through 5. And so definitely can be used with all grade levels. And she just has so many. And I know the question before with 4th grade with CoSpaces, definitely with 4th grade, even I'm sure with kindergarten too, because even if they're just exploring and seeing what it is to develop that understanding, there's also a lot that's available for art. So Jamie's book, I keep nearby, of course, because it has a lot of resources. Now, this one, Catchy Words, when we think about learning, we spend a lot of time sitting, and whether we're students or teachers in PD, over the course of a K through 12 experience in the book Learning Transformed, which is close to Learning Transported, but Learning Transformed by Tom Murray and Eric Scheninger, they talk about the average amount of time that students spend sitting in grades K through 12, and it boils down to roughly like 15 months. So if you imagine just staying where you are right now and not moving until like, I don't know, November of next year, just for quick math, like, how do you feel? So something like this one, this Catchy Words, it is available on iPhones and iPads, but you have the bubble and you break the bubble. So it's augmented reality and there are letters and you pop it and then you grab the letter like by tapping on the letter and then you put it into the space. And if you're right, it shows up like a white line at the bottom. And if you're not, then it's red. And then when you get the word right, it's like, yay, a celebration. Now, the neat thing about this is that you can put the words in. So it's one word at a time. It'll generate the words, or I could, as a Spanish teacher, have a list of vocabulary words, or you could have words relevant to your content area, and students could be paired up and they could take turns typing in one of the words, and then they have to kind of like break it, and then it's good for spelling. And I know that students who have, trouble with spelling for various reasons, like this is something because they're actually physically grabbing the letter and putting it into that, and they're getting the, is it right or is it wrong? And then the celebration, and then they can kind of go back through that. So it's a different way to learn and to practice like spelling, but also to learn about the augmented virtual reality. Now, a couple other things that I'm going to share with you because they're kind of interesting. And these are a little bit different. And I didn't have this, I don't think I had this one in the survey, but I was basing it on time as well. I'm curious if anybody has ever heard of Mozilla Hubs. And if you could put a Y or an N. I thought about actually playing a game of quizzes or something like a Kahoot, one of those games based on like, how much do you know about AR, VR? But in the interest of time, I decided to not do that one. I figured I'd just do the yes or no at this point. There are, in the document that I shared with you, there are a couple, I've written a lot of articles about AR and VR over the last couple of years. And the reason I do that is to make it easier to get started. So when there's so many out there, so that you can look like 15 AR, VR apps for the elementary classroom, and you can see like, here's the link, here's what it does. Great, click and move on. Not that you have to scour and find out like, are these good or are these not good? Well, Hubs is, it's like a web-based VR. So imagine like we are right now in Zoom. And if I, stop sharing my screen, I can see all your little individual spaces. Or if you use Teams in your school or whatever, Google Meet or any of those things, you are in the same space, but you don't totally feel connected. Even though if your camera's on, I can see you, we can talk, I can hear you. It's not quite the same. It's better than not being able to have that technology at all. But when it comes to Hubs and the video that I have playing in the background, somebody said, but I can't hear the video. I do that intentionally. I taught my students that as well. I said, because if you want to kind of talk about it and you don't want to say imagine it, but you don't have a ton of time to actually go through and demo it, having something playing where they can kind of see what it will look like. So with Hubs, you can do a lot of different things. You can set up like a meeting space, a classroom, a library, a restaurant, anything that you want, and have different characters. Now, the people, whenever you're in it, unlike in Zoom, even though, your image on the background could be of anything, you have an avatar. And so your avatar, in this case, on the bottom left, Jamie was Santa and I was the purple cat, which was no surprise. And last year for ISTE, I had a session on AR, VR, and I was asked if I wanted to present it in Hubs. And I had never done that before. I had used Hubs with my students, but I had never presented in Hubs. And I'm like, okay. So very nervous about it because it's ISTE, like, what's this going to be like? So in the background, behind the cat, you'll see this better in the next slide, but behind the cat, you can see there it says AI app creation. That was my slides presentation. So you can screen share and it goes into the space where you are. So imagine that you're the teacher, instead of using Teams or Zoom or Meet, whatever you're using Hubs for your classroom meeting space. You have your room set up. You're sharing your screen just like I am here, except it's kind of like projected onto a wall. And instead of me not being able to see any of you right now because I have it minimized, I see your avatars. But the difference is you can all hear me the same, even though we're geographically very, very distant, some of us more so than others. But in Hubs, you as the avatar need to be close to the person speaking to hear them. So during ISTE last year, as people were entering the room in Hubs, because you share a code and then they come into the room, which I wouldn't recommend sharing that like out on Twitter, because like people could come in and you never know who they are necessarily. But if you're doing this with your class, people come in, and I remember hearing somebody say, okay, you need to move closer. And I could hear people talking, but not very loud because they were far away from me in that Hub space. But as people came closer, they could hear me and I could hear them. So as I'm presenting, and I'm taking this very seriously, Jamie's drawing a pink mustache on my face just because she's Jamie. And I'm like, wow, really? And then the neat thing about this is in Zoom and all these other meeting spaces, we can use breakout rooms. And, you get zapped into like breakout rooms are formed. Okay, you're getting pulled back in. But in using a tool like Hubs and some of the other ones out there, you can have people go into like a breakout room essentially, but all they need to do is move their avatars into a different space in that space online. And if they're across the room, you won't be able to hear them. They'll be able to hear each other when they're close together, but otherwise they can't. So let me go to the next slide. So here is a better image. And again, I was presenting within Hubs. So you can see, and this is a slide that was earlier in this presentation today, it's projecting on the back. Here I am, here's Jamie in front of me. So if we're talking, like I could hear her saying to people, come closer, but people that were further away, I couldn't. It tells you how many people were in the room. So it was like 28 at that point when I did the screenshot. But you can project, you can upload images. So you could create like your own little office space. And I've told my students, you know, there are probably, and I wasn't 100% sure of this, but it made sense, especially thinking about the metaverse. I said, there can be companies who, you know, having an office space in a big city is expensive, or you have people that work for the company that are from around the world, and they want them to feel more connected to the people that they're working with, or for us with our students to feel more connected to the people that we're learning with in our classrooms. So using the Zoom and all these other ones, it helps, but it's not the same. But when you use something like Hubs or one of the other ones out there, it enables you to feel like you're actually in that space, because you hear the person as though they're talking right next to you, not like it's coming through in this kind of distant space. It's similar to if you've used the Quest and you've been playing a game with somebody else, and you're like, I look and I see, you know, your avatar sitting there, and then I hear you. It's a little bit closer. Now, I did a blog about these virtual spaces. I have that linked in the document, but you know, you can upload images. You could take pictures. So this one, Jamie actually joined my STEAM course in May of 2020, and they were already, they're like they needed no instruction. I was like, well, first you do this. And all I heard was like this, the shutter, like a camera picture. So you can take the pictures, you can line up. It has the names above. So some of my students were drawing and adding objects into that. You can tweet it out automatically from within Hubs and invite people to join your space. So it's just a different way of meeting. AR/VR has been around for a long time. Video games back in the 50s. Even if people ever use something like Second Life, that is, I think, I don't want to say 20 years old, but probably 15. I could be wrong on that. So that's just quick thinking, but I know it has been around for a long time. And this is kind of similar to that, but it's beyond that, because you have the avatar. And even at that point, and there was another one like Engage, people thought, well, this is kind of like really interesting. This one, and I know we're winding down on time here, I want to share with you, because this one kind of scared me a little bit. Jamie had chats on Wednesday nights, and she would always have a different tool that she would use. And this one Wednesday, she shared Spatial XR, which very similar to Hubs, except if you look at the images, there's me. And of course, those aren't my real arms. Some of you may know David Lockett or Scott Moons, and Katie McNamara was also involved in this. But on this top right picture, there's a picture on the wall. So you can, like in Hubs, like in this one, like in some of the other ones, you can upload images to make it like your own space. So it's kind of like an office, or, you know, and have family, friends, whatever. You can write, you can stream video into it. But this one, it creates your 3D avatar by using your webcam, and it takes a selfie. And then it mirrors your interactions. So even when you're in this, it's not like it's actually seeing my face, even though it created my avatar that looks like my face. And as I smile or laugh or move my head, it mirrors that. And it uses the webcam instead of having to use a headset. But you get kind of the same experience, because you feel like the person is actually talking right in your ear, especially if you're using. But you can join with those other headsets, like it mentions. And also, you know, can be a different way to present and have a meeting space. But some of these companies can have meetings within these different spaces. There is another one that's called Frame. I skipped a couple just in the interest of time here, but Frame, Mozilla Hubs. With students, the Hubs, they really liked. There is another one that Sina, I'm going to type this one in the chat here. Sina VR was another one that we tried with my students, just to see what they thought. And the problem was we were all in the same classroom and they're trying to talk. And I'm like, but it's echoing. It's not the same experience. But in virtual learning, when we were doing this in May of 2020, we, got out of Zoom and went into this. And I remember some of my students who are now going to be juniors this year saying, wait, I see Mrs. Poth, I can't hear her. And then I could hear one student say, that's because you're not standing close enough to her. You have to move over. And then when we took the picture, Jamie, Santa Claus, was saying, okay, everybody line up. Okay, look this way. And then she, took the picture right within Hubs. So there's tons of options out there. Even more than what I shared with you. I know in the survey, I had some other tools available, but based on your questions and concerns about like something to get started that you can start with tomorrow, lots of possibilities. Going back, Nearpod, of course, I started with just because like the VR trips are there and it's simple. If you want to add activities in, you can. Supporting learning, especially with Nearpod, having a different variety of activities that are in there and the videos and ways that you can have students show and share what they're learning. Also, the functionalities like for accessibility with the immersive reader that comes in Nearpod and also within Merge. And then with your math classroom, I know English, there were some examples. I did find one, let's see if this is the right one. Oh, there we go. I saw that question come up and there is a list of some math apps. I know somebody mentioned GeoGebra. I always say it wrong, but free Google AR/VR experiments is free, of course, and it's a good one to start with. But you don't have to know all there is to know. You just need to know enough to get started and then see what happens with the students and where they take it. And Jamie is definitely a great resource. And I want to save, some time if you have any questions or anything to make sure that you had access to the codes, all of that's in the document. And I don't know, anybody has any questions, drop them in. Dr. Alexander, thank you so much for this. That went fast.
It did go fast. It was so much information. I do want to ask the math ones that you just dropped, are they in your resources already?
No, I have to add it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So for my people that are watching the video, that will be added to the resources. So you don't have to worry about missing out on any of the resources.
Oh, and that one other thing too, and I don't know if anybody saw this, there is, so I did, and I know you did one with a new ed tech classroom at ISTE as well. And mine was supposed to be about something else. We ended up talking about AR, VR, which was great. But there is this, I think I have the screenshots in there, like I just shared, the codes are in there, the AR, VR, but there is a newsletter that I started to get, and I put that link, I think at the beginning. Yeah, there it is. I'm going to drop that into the chat. There is this, you may get a lot of newsletters, but there is one, it's called the Emerging Tech Brew, and it's not spammy. It comes, I think, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, but you choose the topics that you're interested in. And some of them are things like 5G, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, blockchain, but they're really interesting things. And so I dropped the link there. If you sign up for it, you'll get based on whatever you pick. But I use that when I get really excited. I get like one that comes through when I'm teaching my STEAM course. I'm like, oh my goodness, like check this out. And, the nice thing about my STEAM class is it's on emerging technology. So it's always evolving. And sometimes I have a plan for the day and then I get like the newsletter. I'm like, wow, what do you think about this? Especially when things were coming out with like the metaverse. And that's another reason why we have to know a lot about AR, VR is because the metaverse and what the implications are for that. And then things like NFTs and blockchain. And there are a lot, like even in higher education, there are meta universities that are already in progress and have been for at least the last year plus, and there are more for the fall. My students really love talking about the benefits and the disadvantages of it too. But there's a lot out there to know. So I'm not the expert, but some things like that newsletter, if you're looking for some resources. My blog, I don't always write about AR, VR. I have people do guest blog posts. I repost some of the posts I've done for other sites, but I just want to share ideas to make it easier for people to get started and to save you time, because I love investing the time in it and sharing with others. So learning from you as well. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out at any point. I always respond.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Not only I would just come just for the list of resources and then to hear you kind of talk through everything, show us new tools, be completely honest about, what's paid, what's free, how you can manipulate. And just thank you so much for all of the information, all of the
Yeah.
resources, and letting us know too, like, how do I get started, right? Like, how do I get started? Then I can do the rest later, right? You can only
Mhm.
start where you can start. So don't let your head hurt, Eric.
I know mine does too. Cause I'm like thinking like, wait, what? Because I'm looking at I have my, like right here, there's the survey. Cause I wanted to make sure answering questions ahead of time and all of that. And I'm like, I don't want to forget anything. I had a list of things I didn't want to forget.
And even doing that, not everyone does that, where you want to make sure that your audience is taken care of. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for spending time on a Saturday, whether it's the afternoon or later in the evening, if you're joining in from around the world, which is awesome.